Hey everybody, welcome back to Hollis Does Brunch, or if it's your first time here, welcome. This is a talk show that's just capturing what's happening today, talking to folks who are really on the ground, both artists and activists who are doing the work and pushing forward for true social and systems change. I am so thrilled to have the guests that I have this Sunday. We are interviewing hometown heroes of Seattle, both of the podcast activist class, as well as the coalition Decrim Seattle or Decriminalize Seattle. They have really been doing the work for years and frankly generations, and there's been an enormous week of wins this week that we're going to reflect on, both to defund the Seattle Police Department and also to think about how that money can go towards genuine community investment and building the reality that we wish to see, not always just being in reaction. Obviously, a lot of folks know Seattle has been at the center of this national narrative that, like oftentimes happens, is completely distanced from the reality of what's happening on the ground. So I'm really excited to be able to provide space for these folks to come forward and let us know really what has been driving the demands of activists, where things are at, and how we can best be of support. We're also going to be fundraising for WABLOC, which is a youth-led leadership social justice coalition and education program led by one of our guests today, Rel Be Free, as well as Creative Justice, which is a program that provides creative alternatives for incarceration for young people and whose ED is our very own Nikita Oliver. So I'm hyped to be fundraising for them. You can look below in the YouTube link or the YouTube description for the link to donate via card, or you could just Venmo me at Hollis-Ware, and you can give. And then at the end of the program, we're going to announce how much we raise for these programs that will be raising the next generation of freedom fighters and activists. Abolition does not happen overnight. And obviously what we saw over the last month was a more general public awakening to the understanding of why it's important to defund the police, why it's important to invest in community-based solutions, why the current system that exists actually seeks to strip communities of their finances and their resources and federal funding and direct it outside of the city, why it's important and imperative for us to demand that that money stays within our communities and seek nonviolent ways of being together and being with each other and being in community. And these folks are really showing truth to power for all of that. So I'm really excited to bring them on right now. So please give a warm welcome to activist class in Decriminalize Seattle. What's up, everyone? Unmute.
Hello. What's up?
Hello.
Hi. Howdy ho. Thanks so much for joining me for brunch, y'all. And if you're tuning in live, please drop your name and where you're tuning in from in the chat to say what's up. We already have Gabriel Teodro saying what's up, fam.
What up, Gabe?
Big bro.
Love it. And big shouts to Nick Biba as well, who's going to be moderating the chat just in case we get some haters in. Yeah. We have so much to talk about, so I would love for us to just kick it off with introductions for each of you to say a little bit about who you are, what brings you to the work, what brings you to brunch today, what you're eating today, and then we're going to dig into the very meaty subjects that we have in front of us in terms of defunding, the SPD, and all of your collective incredible work going into that, and what's next and how we can best support. So let's start with you, Rel.
What's poppin', y'all? My name is Jarrell. I go by Rel Be Free. From the south end of Seattle. I'm a musician, artist. They call me activist and organizer. Some of the collectives that I've been a part of, and there's been a lot, and I usually don't really get the chance to say all of them. And so I'm going to lay them all out right now because I think that building community and building what we're trying to do can't just be limited to one pot because we have to wear a few different hats. And so one of the main hats that I wear is as a co-founder of WABLOC, that's Washington Building Leaders of Change, which is an organization that was started by young folk, young adults a few years ago, really coming out of us wanting to create space within the public school system for identity formation, revolutionary action, and leadership development of young folks, as well as for young adults like myself at the time. Shout out to WABLOC. There's a bunch of co-founders. There's a bunch of people that are doing great work right now. Visit the website and appreciate all the donations. And I will say making a monthly donation versus like a one-time is actually a little helpful. Over the last like month, we've gotten way more individual donations than we've ever had before. And so I either encourage people to donate to another organization or to, you know, if you're going to donate $10, do it $1 for 10 months or do it, you know, how like that. So I'm just want to throw that in there. Some of the other things that I organize with is Rainier Beach Action Coalition. And we do a autonomous community safety project called Corner Greeters. We've been doing that for about 5 years now. And a lot of that's actually led some of the conversations on abolition within the city of Seattle, and especially the organizing community. I appreciate all the different organizers and dope people that have been a part of Corner Greeters. Shout out to the young people in Rainier Beach that have been holding Corner Greeters down for 5 years. And there's some big news with RBAC and obtaining a space within the South End to start some development in the future as well. Shout out to Seattle People's Party, Decriminalize Seattle, which I think are very connected, but obviously not the same thing. Black Elephant Army for self-defense. It's a beautiful, I feel like I'm just connected to so many amazing people, amazing dope organizers that care about people in a very real way. And I'm just a product of my environment, a product of my community. Shout out to my family members, my sisters, my loved ones. I'm real. Go listen to my music and shit. I talk about real stuff, not that dumb shit y'all like to talk about. I'm sipping tea.
Damn, all right.
I'm going to pass it to Mayra, who's going to introduce himself.
And I will sip some coffee. How do I follow that up? So my name is Mayra. I use she and they pronouns. I am an architectural designer, a cartoonist, an artist, and an activist, which combines all of those hats and roles that all those skills that I have to talk about housing justice, right to the city, and how we still experience this like ongoing segregation that is perpetuated by all our socioeconomic systems that I feel like a lot of white Americans just don't, they think that all of that shit's over, right? And all our housing systems, all our banks, etc., they perpetuate all that shit. So that's where I find my calling, especially as someone that's, you know, an architect, and I see that shit perpetuated in that industry all the time. So that's where I'm at now. I'm a podcaster. I'm now used to hearing my own voice. And I usually don't eat breakfast, so I respect the performance. I respect the bit. So I made Dutch babies. I've never made them in my life. They're pretty cool. Yeah. So that's me.
It's looking delicious. Thank you so much. Let's kick it to Aretha.
Hello, friends. Good morning. My name is Aretha. My pronouns are she and her. Really honored to be with you all this morning. Like Rel, there's a lot of different organizations over the last couple of years. We just have like a bunch of different t-shirts at this point. So shouting them out, you know, I started with Women of Color for Systemic Change back in 2014 when I first started organizing as a young, spry 18-year-old. No Youth Jail, Block the Bunker, Seattle People's Party, Asians for Black Lives, South Asians for Black Lives. Shout out to all the Daisies who are coming into the movement. And during my day, I work for Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda. Shout out to Timo. And I have the honor of also being a podcaster here on Activist Class, which has been super surreal, something that I've wanted to do for a long time and really, really love the crew. So, and also now Decriminalize, because that is currently what we're working on. And we'll get into that a little bit later of the story of Decriminalize. So outside of organizing, I'm also a dancer. I've been a Bollywood dancer since 2008. And yeah, so really excited to be with you all this morning. And I'm going to kick it off to Chrissy.
I just found out that Aretha does Bollywood dancing. What? Okay, anyway, my name is Christy Shimizu. I use she, her pronouns, and I grew up in Seattle. I currently work at the Wing Luke Museum in the Chinatown International District, which is my community and a big part of my life growing up. I organized with the CID Coalition and with Decriminalize Seattle. Something that I've definitely learned being part of a community like Chinatown International District with like hella elders and aunties and uncles is that we have to be connected to our history, and we have to be connected to our ancestors and the generations before us who did the work that we can carry forward now. And nothing can humble you more. And like, I feel like nothing has humbled me more actually in this work than listening to the stories of my elders, but also understanding that like our history is complex, our history is deep, it's very relational, it can get sticky, there's like beef that lasts forever, and like you really just have to sit back and listen and not think that you know shit. And I'm guided by that wisdom. I am now organizing with Decriminalize Seattle after doing more political organizing and working in the nonprofit sector for 10 years and just feeling like that's not the seed of change. That's not where change actually happens. Those tactics are important, but they're not what makes the work move forward. So I'm really in a constant state of learning and growth, and really appreciative of the people that I get to now organize alongside who are brilliant and on this pod today. And I'm not eating anything because I woke up late, but I'm going to pass it to Speck.
What up? My name is Beck, he, him pronouns. I am an artist, producer, content creator, focus less on the ground organizing and more on storytelling and producing media and content that documents and frames the things that are happening in this town. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I produce Activist Class podcasts, and I am a very online person. So that's me. I'm gonna kick it off today.
Damn, Spec threw me off for a sec, but I'm Day. I am from Honolulu, Hawaii. Moved here, I think, 2014. Met a lot of organizers here. Was doing more housing advocate stuff back in Hawaii. Continued to do them more and more here in Seattle. A lot of stuff covering specifically the homeless sweeps happening here. Met these dope organizers from Wablock, from Creative Justice, from No New Youth Jail. Joined them in running a pretty polarizing but powerful mayoral campaign in 2017, if you remember that. Shout out Nikita Oliver. And now just doing more work with Decrim Seattle. Do a lot of writing, do a lot of freelance journalism. Some might argue advocacy journalism. A lot of traditional journalists probably think I'm a little too biased on my takes, but you know, it is what it is. But I'm happy to be here. On Twitter way too much, as most everyone else here as well. But happy to be here. Thanks for having us, Hollis.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Wow, what a action-packed intro session. I don't even know if we can like unpack everything that went down besides, you know, like Speck hitting the joint, Aretha being a Hollywood dancer.
Yeah,
No.
like, do we get rebuttals?
Who are you people?
Who are you people? You know, you learn something new about everybody every single day. So it's a beautiful thing. Well, I'm really excited to just get into it with y'all. You know, it has been a huge week in Seattle. And I think for us, we really want to focus on the work that Decriminalize Seattle is doing, what the coalition is, its kind of legacy and the way in which it formed from years and decades of organizing work, the demands, and then what lies ahead. But really quickly, I think we'd be remiss to not mention two other huge wins that happened that kind of bookended this week. And so the first thing I want to shout out is the Jumpstart tax that was passed by City Council on Monday with a 7-2 vote. Aretha, you work for Teresa Mosqueda, so I'm curious if you can give us a little bit of context, very high level, in terms of what that tax means and why it's significant.
Yeah, absolutely. So shout out to my office. They did a shit ton of work on that, and to all of the community members that we were able to work with over the course of the last couple months. just very high level. Jumpstart Seattle would allocate $86 million per year for 2020 and 2021, and it'll grow to $200 million per year in 2022 and ongoing. Starting with the short-term needs of residents and small businesses facing income loss, it builds in 2022 and beyond to invest in affordable housing, equitable development, and economic revitalization.
Amazing. So yeah, and I think that the just really quick stats that admittedly I just ripped off of the Seattle Times, but I think something that really speaks to this tax, both why it's so essential. I think for me, it has killed me to see Amazon sponsor like coronavirus relief funds when I'm just in the corner being like, just pay your taxes. If you paid your taxes, we wouldn't have to do any of this shit and it would be fine. But really quick stats in terms of like what this tax actually means. It's taxing folks that start at a salary of $180,000 a year. So if you're making $180,000 a year at a corporation within the city of Seattle, you will pay a tax of 0.7%, which means that you will pay $1,260 towards the city if you're making $180,000. Then the most, like this highest tax, the strongest tax is a 2.4% rate, which is on salaries of over $400,000. And overall, this tax is supposed to bring $200 million, but I think it's long overdue. Obviously, a lot of folks have been fighting for it, and so it's dope, Aretha, that you've been there behind the scenes, and Teresa's been pushing it. And then the other thing we want to shout out really quickly that happened and came in on Friday is King County courts saying with certainty that a recall process can proceed to recall Mayor Jenny Durkin. So, Day, I'm curious if you could give us a little bit more context on that.
Oh, Jennifer. Yeah, Durkin is, I'm going to be honest, the organizers of Decrim Seattle, I think it's safe to say, I think I'm allowed to say this, like, I wouldn't say it wasn't one of our priorities to figure out what this whole resign, recall, Durkin process would look like. But, you know, as Aretha tells us many times, like, we need to believe in the diversity of tactics. And yeah, there was a group of people who put out in front of a judge, King County Superior Court judge, 7 different reasons and charges against Jenny Durkin, our mayor, on why she should be recalled, or at least it should be put to democracy, to votes, to signatures, etc. Excuse me. And Durkin's attorney was there fighting it. And 6 out of the 7 charges were dismissed or not counted or whatever the legal term is, except one. And that one charge was the fact that Durkin allowed for chemical warfare, tear gas, etc., those type of crowd control tactics on protesters, especially during a pandemic. The Superior Court judge ruled that fucked up, basically, and said, sorry, I'm going to hold that one at least to be true, and not a ballot measure, but I guess the details are still being worked out. I talked to a couple reporters at the Times to see if they had more clarity, but I think right now, as we all are trying to still figure out the details of it, 25% of the people who voted in the mayoral election in 2017 is the required amount of signatures needed to recall Durkin. From that point on, will that require just a special election or a recall election? Those are the two types of second steps that I'm still kind of unclear about. But I think at the end of the day, once the 56,000 or so signatures get met, we're either going to be faced with a decision of nominating someone else or receiving a ballot that either says, do you want to recall Durkin or not recall Durkin? And here are the charges. The charges will be listed on that ballot. It's not going to be tied into any presidential ballot, or we're not going to have to wait till November. I believe whenever we get those signatures, between 45 to 90 days after that, we'll receive that ballot, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yes. Awesome. So yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of things that are still information, but it is exciting news to know that although the mayor's lawyer fought to get all of these charges expunged, the fact that tear gas, a chemical weapon, was used on the citizens of Seattle will not stand in the court of law. And I think even though that seems so blatantly obvious, it is nice to see the courts acknowledge that. And that's a really important process. Christy, was there anything that you wanted to add to today's overview?
No, I think he got it. I just had like the news came out Friday night at like 11:45. So it was like a story that like kind of got buried, but then blew up the next day. But yeah, they covered it all. And I just had like a nice visual image of like Jenny Durkin like throwing a stapler against the wall and screaming.
Don't forget, y'all, this is the same mayor that choked out her staff. That was a whole ass story that got buried in the news. So like, this is not
hot.
Jenny was like on the phone all weekend, like, my people, what do I do?
Mm-hmm. And Jenny's tuned in right now. Jenny's tuned in right now, and yeah, we didn't forget. You did one of those thingies.
But don't forget, she worked all night Sunday night just to write that letter to slander Sawant after we visited her house. So she's working.
Yeah.
Jenny is pressed, y'all. She's so pressed.
She's working hard.
Former federal prosecutor.
Her address is out. She's getting recalled. Oh my God.
She has nightmares about day at night.
Definitely not. All right. Shout out Jenny.
Word. Well, I want to shout out really quick everybody who's tuning in right now. We have 120 people tuning in, and we actually have already raised $1,000 towards Walla and justice. So I normally shout out everybody, but it's coming at me really quickly. I'm so thankful for y'all mobilizing, whether you're tuning in from Seattle or tuning in outside. But thank you so much for your support of the next generation. What were you going to say, Mayra? Were you going to say something?
I was going to say shout out to all my family. Hi, my siblings are here.
This is the real fundraiser. We don't need sushi restaurants. Was that too much?
Oh, Blue, no. That's for the after brunch party. That's what
I didn't say names. I just said sushi.
No, I will say names because I have spent a lot of money at Momiji over the years.
Oh yeah, that corny shit. I thought that's what you were talking about. I was like, what?
Yeah. Because that was the other creative justice wall block fundraiser.
This is the accountable one.
So please, I would love if we could get to 2K today and be able to pay $1,000 each to Wall Block and Creative Justice for their incredible visionary programming that is bringing together creative arts and social justice. But yeah, so let's get into it. Let's talk Decriminalize Seattle. Again, like this cultural moment is one in which, I don't think with you at the top of the year, there's a lot of things I didn't think were going to happen, but I definitely didn't think that like abolition of the prison industrial complex and defunding the police departments was something that would be so popularized. I'd be seeing carousels on Instagram. And the reality of it is that none of this could have happened if there hadn't been decades of work to this point to really envision what defunding and dismantling these systems look like. So I'm curious, what is Decriminalize Seattle? What is Decriminalize Seattle and how did it come to be? If we could just talk a little bit about the history of what led up to this coalition forming, and then really talking about how the demands that have been propelling activism since that time came to be. That'd be dope. Rel, Aretha, who wants to take this on first?
Yeah, Reef, I'll start and then you can fill in the blanks.
You got it.
Yeah, one thing that's really dope about the organizing scene in Seattle is that we do practice a whole lot. We be working together. Solidarity is thick. And while we still definitely got, anti-Blackness and all these different intersections that make things hard, I know that for myself, I feel like every organizing group I've been a part of has been very multidisciplinary, been multiracial, multi-ethnic, as well as like the visions and the mentalities from the radicalism to the ideas is always very much in sync. And so Decrim is really a bunch of different groups that have worked together on different things. Like you might be No New Youth Jail, or we tapped in over here for Seattle People's Party. And it kind of came back together. I know Aretha's going to talk about some of the past history of Decrim. But recently, obviously, I think a lot of us were inspired, really. I know I was inspired when I saw the police precinct on fire in Minneapolis. I was like, oh, this is a new, just like when COVID hit, I was like, oh, this is a whole new world we get to live in now. And I think that a lot of us were just energized by feeling the energy that people, not just in the city, but nationwide and worldwide, are really tapping into, because we also elevate the internationalism of what we're doing. So when we're talking about abolition in the United States, in Seattle, we're not just talking about here. This is an international movement, because there are vanguards of the revolution in Mindanao, and Darfur, in Central America. And I think that we're really trying to connect those. And so Decrim is a bunch of homies. Like, we're really actually friends, like legitimate friends, that organize in different pockets. And we try to ball up the fist. Decrim is like the fist that's balled up. And so we're able to be, accountable with each other. We're able to really have true radical conversations, as well as elevate each other's platforms. And that multidisciplinary part is what's really important to me as well, is the fact that we're not all, one trick horses. Like, we all wear a number of different hats within our communities, and Decrim is our opportunity to create political education, to really push a united message, which I think the defund came out of. And really, I got to do a special shout out for Nikita, because, and I say that because I know she doesn't like the personal attention, but the way that she's leveraged her platform to elevate these things, and she has taken hits for it, I think is unprecedented. And I think that it's very inspiring and noble the way that she holds herself, and has like elevated the platform of Decriminalize Seattle with her platform. And she's done that in a very accountable way, by checking in with elders, by checking in with young folk, by checking in with the team before she makes moves. And so I know that she gets individualized in this movement, and that's actually something that Decrim, we want to work against. We don't want not just her to be individualized, but myself, Aretha, Day, but for people to know that it's coalition, it's group, and we're all connected throughout the city. So I'll pass it to Aretha, because I feel like she'll also be able to give some good history on it.
Yeah, thank you, Will. I think it's a really good point that we are just a bunch of homies, we're family, and that's one of the most important ways like we organize relationally. Taking a couple steps back, Decriminalize has a lot of roots. One of those roots being, we want to honor that, a lot of the work that has gone into uplifting, one, like decriminalizing as an analysis is attributed to people who have been trying to decriminalize sex work across the nation, across the world. And so last year, for Decriminalize Seattle specifically, we came together during the fall budget process. So every fall, the city council receives the budget from the mayor. And it's like the Hunger Games, unfortunately, where a lot of, very well-respected, valiant efforts are pitted against each other for small pots of money. And council members have to give concessions here and there. But there were a lot of things that were baked into that budget last year that were very harmful. Things like emphasis patrols, things like increases in policing, things like increases in probation services. And so Decriminalize kind of birthed out of that, saying, we want to not only decriminalize all of the ways in which communities have been criminalized, right? Like, we want people to be able to thrive. We want people to be able to survive. And these things don't contribute to that. So it was a coalition of people that really lobbied through the budget process to get funding for, shout out to Sheree for the Greenlight Project, for POC Swap, who do incredible harm reduction work in the North End, specifically for sex workers and drug users. And also trying to push an analysis of what does it look like for us to not be so reliant on the criminal legal system. So that was like the original roots of Decriminalize, and then kind of, trickled down for a while. And we've, rebirthed ourselves, with the defund campaign, because defunding the police is one tactic of decriminalizing all of the ways in which poverty has been criminalized. So those are a little bit of our roots and how we came to be, especially in the city.
Can I say one more thing too? Yeah, shout out to women, femmes, non-binary, and trans folk that are really leading the organizing, like point blank period. I'm usually like one of few like cisgendered men that are in the room. Like, shout out to women and femmes for like holding down decades and centuries of organizing, that we stand on the shoulders of that work. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that every time I have an opportunity to speak, because that's so important. as not just a foundation, but especially as moving forward in this movement. So just wanted to shout that out, that I know that we're standing on shoulders of folks that don't always get acknowledged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100.
Yeah.
Yes, and Maddie and Ivana and all the homies who've been doing work for years.
I think, thank you both so much for breaking that down in terms of like the roots of decrim and then where things are at now, and really understanding that defunding the police is a tactic. It is not the end goal, because the whole point is the vision, right? And I want to talk about that a little bit more. I would like to just give a little bit of context in terms of where we're at right now with defunding the police, which is the first demand that has been crystallized by Decriminalize Seattle, which is defunding SPD by 50%. Their actions have very clearly demonstrated why they no longer deserve the absurd amount of money that the city government gives them per year for public safety, safety for who, protecting who, right, serving who. And so I'm curious if we could get into a little bit in terms of like what last week signified in terms of the fight towards actualizing that tactic of defunding. And Day, if we could kick that to you, that'd be dope.
In terms of defunding, yeah, I want to shout out Angelica, and I want to shout out Jackie, who's part of Decrim Seattle, and they've been really on the forefront. Of course, it was a joint effort. Nikita, et cetera, has helped out a lot with that, but they presented City Council with a policy proposal, a participatory budget, because not only do we want to defund police, and that was our first demand, but you know, I'm going to pass it off to Christy after this, because I think she can really break down if we're not careful about our second demand and where that money goes to, we're going to be in a lot of similar problems that we have right now with the overfunded, over-militarized police budget. But pause on that for a second. Jackie and Angelica, Decrim Seattle, presented this super dope plan of where the millions and millions of funding can go towards. And yeah, it's City Council received it. We knew a couple of people on the council was on board. Not really sure where some of them stood. You know, we have some of them are new, like Tammy Morales. This is, I believe, Teresa's first term that's coming to an end next year.
Yeah.
But a lot of other councils have this is like their second term, third term. You know, Lorena has been on council for a while. Lisa Herbold, Dan Strauss is new, and I want to point that out too, because there's a track record with a lot of these guys, and I'm happy that we have 7 committed, and I'm not trying to talk any stink about them, especially when we have them exactly making the decision that we want them to make for community. But at the same time, to that kind of mistrust and not really sure what they're going to vote at the end of the day, there's a track record of that. And I think that type of skepticism and fear is valid, especially for those who've been organizing for a while. We passed an Amazon tax a couple years ago, and it got pushed back by the mayor, and a lot of our council members folded. And that's just what happened. You know, a lot of our council members voted for a regressive, really harmful police budget, or police union contract, sorry. And so there are those things that are going on. And so when we presented council with this budget, and we knew that this week we're coming off a momentous push on taxing Amazon that Monday, and Wednesday was a budget proposal. And so on Thursday, we decided to do a press conference to make sure that we got City Council who supported us off the bat. That's Mosqueda, that's Morales, that's Sawant, and Gonzalez, thankfully, on, I guess not on stage because we're in COVID, but at least on Zoom, doing a press conference, the pandemic version, with the organizers of Decrim, with the orgs, the Black trans-led, sex worker-led orgs. That honestly, that was my favorite part of the press conference on Thursday, is that the visuals and the centering was really clear. Like, the orgs that were represented that day are the orgs that we're working with, and that's Black, trans, and sex worker orgs. And I mean, I think it laid out a pretty clear precedent on the type of service workers that we are calling and demanding to support. That's very different in the past, and something that our friend Sheree, who leads Green Light Project and POC Swap, tells us all the time is that, or reminds us all the time is, these orgs are able to do tremendous work with such minimal amount of funding. And imagine if there was real substantial funding that started going in to the work that we as community believe in. And so press conference happened, the 4 council members joined in. Within a couple of hours, thank you Twitter army and people who showed up to protest that day. We got 3 more to commit to voting for defunding police by 50%. And that's kind of where we're at right now. But still really worried about what the second demand is going to look like and how community is going to be funded, and some of the concerns that I think Christy can talk better to.
Thanks so much for that breakdown, Day. Yeah, Christy, do you want to take it on? I think it's great that we have that background in terms of what brought people to the table. And then obviously what Day mentioned is like, you can't trust that that's going to hold, right? And especially now we've seen that the SPD is already starting to run this counter narrative and this kind of PR campaign to try to diffuse and distract from the act of defunding and fuck with the narrative. So Chrissy, if you want to take that on first, and then we can knock it to Mayra.
Yeah, so there are like 2 things that I heard Day mentioning. One is that now that we're defunding SPD, we have to think about reinvestment. And when we think about reinvestment, we are thinking about reinvesting in a sector that we know is just as harmful and can sometimes be like the soft arm of the state. I want to remind folks too that Charlena Lyles was murdered by cops in housing that was operated by a nonprofit. And those cops had been called to that housing campus multiple times because it was a policy of that nonprofit to call the cops. And they knew Charlena so well that they were joking about her mental health, and that got recorded on the dash cam of their police vehicle before they got out and went in and murdered her in front of her children. So we know that like we need to do significant reforms in the nonprofit sector as well. Defund SPD is important, but also what does reinvestment look like, and where's that money going to go, and what new standards are we going to hold nonprofits to? I've worked in the sector for 10 years and I've seen wild things. And I know that like the power dynamic within nonprofits still maintains systems of power that ultimately like SPD tries to protect. Like a lot of people on boards of directors of nonprofits are businesses and corporate leaders that the SPD serves to protect their property over to protecting people's lives. And so what demands can we then put forward in the nonprofit sector to hold them accountable to not perpetuate harm, to not defund SPD, but then reinvest in community only to perpetuate the same types of oppression? And I think that's where, as Day was mentioning and Aretha was mentioning as well, we have a lot of lessons we can learn from the queer community, the trans community, Black trans femmes, and how they've been doing their work in peer-to-peer counseling, peer-to-peer advocacy, work that builds power and disrupts systems of power to build it from the ground up. And that's definitely something that we're going to have to take into consideration as a next step, because we know we're constantly building and then having to rebuild and like learn and then have to unlearn. And so we're just trying to get ahead of some of those mistakes that we see have happened in past movements, where sometimes oppression or sometimes change can lead to a power vacuum that then gets filled not with radical change, but just oppression that looks a different way. So I think the other thing that Day was saying too, and that you mentioned, Hollis, is that the cops are going to be running with a narrative now that they're needed, and that crime is that crime still happens, that harm still happens, and we need cops on the street in order to like protect us from all the criminals. And I think that it's really important to remember that, like, you know, we can't ultimately outsource this work to any one organization. It's all of our responsibility to figure out how to repair harm when harm is done. And it's our community that takes care of one another. But I'm going to pass that off to Mayra to like go deeper into the narratives that the cops the cops and Jenny might be kind of trying to pull on us right now.
Oh man, how do I follow that up? Yes, so Christy was talking a lot about power, right? And media comes into that, right? Whoever holds the narrative also holds and guides the power. So right now we're seeing two different or two sources of the same narrative, essentially. One's coming from the mayor and one's coming from SPD, right? So for the mayor, we kind of maybe sort of countered her, since with the whole resign Jenny, how strong protesters have been with the 3 demands plus more, right? There's been cohesion since like 2 weeks in, and people have not let up on those demands, which have been great, you know. But I would say she did try to come in and take that narrative away from us by, so as you all know, we're in a pandemic, right? So already the budget was supposed to be slashed by quite a lot, right? We're in a recession. And we were pretty sure she was going to try to take credit for slashing SPD's budget and play it off as though it was political reasoning, right? But it was actually just, you know, everything has to be cut, right? Austerity measures 100% were in. And that's where that whole $20 million cut came. Like the Seattle Times was like, Seattle mayor's cutting the police budget by 20 million, which is a ridiculous number, right? That was 5% of what we were demanding. So that's where, so clever. Everyone said, you know, Jenny, you missed a zero, right? It was supposed to be 50, not 5%. So that's one like source of narrative shifting. The other one, which is much heavier and much more sinister, is the one from SPD. Where immediately we started seeing, you know, the blaming protesters for any sort of violence, bodily violence, and down to death, right? Without addressing all the underlying issues that our city has been going through, you know, since someone's like, you could argue from its inception, right? Like this is a city based on genocide and racism, just like any other city, right? So yeah, they're not addressing those issues at all, and instead are just seeing this as like this biosphere isolated from all, you know, all the criminalization, all the underfunding to Black and brown neighborhoods, and then all the gentrification that's happened in the past 10 years. I mean, it's happened forever, right? But it's been it's been pretty intense for the past 10 years, especially since 2013 when Amazon expanded and our rent started shooting up incrementally. No, not incrementally, just by a lot, right? So so there's that aspect. And also now with, like what Day was saying, that we have like a good amount of council members that have pledged to defund the police by 50%, right? So SPD is trying to get ahead of that by saying, well, if we get defunded, that means that we're going to have to, you know, fire so many of our BIPOC officers, right? They call it loss of officer diversity. Once again, not addressing that, wait, does that mean that all your high-ranking officers are all white? That's just playing into our own hands, like, that's exactly what's wrong with the whole system, right? Like, so there's that, and yeah, I guess that's. Oh, and all of this is playing into a national right-wing news cycle, right? So what we're seeing here is getting exported everywhere, and you know, all eyes are on us right now. So I think that's why it's super important to still call and email our council members, especially the ones that we know are on the fence but are probably coming in here right now because it looks good. So we're talking Strauss, Lewis, Herbold. Keep emailing them, and maybe we'll get a Peterson and a Horace, but probably not. So yeah, but that's all I got.
Hollis is muted.
Yup. Anyway, thank you, Mayra. Appreciate your words and calling out the people that need to get called out. Yes, snaps for everybody. Let's just, even if you're tuning in here at home, let's hear a little snappage. Narrative is everything, right? And whether that's like the way in which we as creative organizers and people who are about community investment are shaping our own narrative and taking it away from the hands of those who have criminalized communities in the past, or if it's like really battling and confronting the narratives that are being spun, whether that's like that national right-wing shit where Jenny Durkin can look like a liberal hero versus Trump when really, she's chemical warfaring her own citizens at home, or what you're talking about with SPD, talking about like, oh no, like BIPOC people are gonna lose their jobs when really that's completely under their control, the ways in which that policy is laid down. Anyway, Aretha, I'm wondering if you can take it from here and talk about like, it's not enough to just counteract narratives that are false and serve to criminalize and to spread falsehoods. Like it's really important to be building an alternative vision and alternative reality. And I know, Rel, that's something you want to talk on too. So I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so a couple points that I wanted to make is, Seattle is not working in isolation. As Rel talked about earlier, like Minneapolis burning that cop car is really what I think set the bar high for all of us across the country. And this work is happening in multiple cities. But what that work looks like is going to be different in every city, right? Because the needs are different. I think that we're all building a world that none of us have lived in. And it very much feels like we are building the ship as we are running it. And so, thinking about demand number 2, right, which is invest in community. Rel talks about this a lot, Nikita talks about this a lot. Just to cut millions and millions of dollars from the police department, yes, in itself is a revolutionary act, but the way in which that gets reinvested matters, right? Throwing millions of dollars at community organizations that for so long have been doing incredible work, but with scraps of money is a setup, right? Like that's one of my favorite talking points that Rel always talks about. And so in this work, the way I've been trying to ground myself is, this is the first time we're really operationalizing a lot of the abolitionist values and principles and dreams that we've had for so long. Selfishly, like to be able to see defund the police in a mainstream narrative and to see it spray painted all over the city, like, is wild. And so as we're figuring out, one, like these cuts and where they come from and how we do them, and then thoughtfully and intentionally figuring out how we move that money into community, it's been a messy process, and it's going to be a messy process. The 4-point plan that we currently have, so there's 2 different kind of mini campaigns that are running, right? So the council is in its 2020 rebalancing package. So all of the money that gets spent in this year is what's on the table. And then in the fall is a larger process that talks about the money that's going to get spent next year. So that's when all of the things are on the table. Currently, what's on the table is money that has already either been spent or whatever's left over. So for SPD, their budget is 400 million. Half of that would be 200 million. And then they've already been spending a shit ton of that money anyways. So within our 4 different buckets, part of that is civilianizing the 911 system, which I can talk about. The second part of that would be scaling up community-based organizations to be able to receive those funds. The third thing is a summer research program that is run and designed and implemented by those who have experienced police violence and state violence. And the fourth one is housing. So one of the ones that I'm really excited about, I'm excited about all of them, but I think when we've been talking about, what does it look like to move power away from the state, civilianizing 911 is a really important point, right? When you call 911, that you're going to get a cop, right? Like there's not a lot of options for you as a person who's calling 911 if you're in crisis. But we know that there's incredible networks around our city and across the country in different cities as well, who are doing mutual aid work, who are doing harm reduction work, who are doing interruptions to interpersonal violence, who are working on domestic violence, all of the things that we actually need uplifted and invested in exist in our city. They're just not centralized and we don't have access to them as residents of the city. So part of the vision around civilianizing 911 is when that 911 operator, gets retrained, they listen to your call, they also then will be equipped to have an entire suite of options to be able to, once they hear what crisis you're in, be able to deploy those accurately. Because right now it's like the cops respond to everything. And I think it was 2 weeks ago in the select budget committee of the council. So the council is currently doing an inquest into SPD's budget. We saw the types of calls that SPD responds to, and majority of them are not violent crimes or violent calls. So those are things that we can handle ourselves and have been handling, right? Like communities who have been over-policed have figured out alternative methods and alternative mutual aids for years. So I think when Seattle is figuring out how we defund the police and what that looks like for our city, it's always important to know that we're not doing this work in isolation, and that, cities across the country are popping off as well, and also trying to wrangle with how do we really actually put these ideals and visions and dreams into practice. So I'm going to kick it off to Rel, who is one of my favorite people to talk about this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Word. Yeah. And thank you, Aretha. Thank you everybody for all the dope wisdom and just real shit that's being said here. I think one thing I really want to just address too is for people to remember, we've been living in this particular system for hundreds of years. So when we offer this alternative, when we offer changing how this shit looks, you can't give us a week and be like, come up with the proposal next week. Fuck out of here, bro. We've been fighting this shit for decades, and then they're expecting us to create the new alternative system in literally a week. Literally a week. Sit on that, right? So I think that we need to understand that it does take time to build. And that's why we always, shout out to Sinite Brown, shout out to Octavia Butler, shout out to Adrienne Marie Brown, dope people that have encouraged me to really think about what it looks like for us to build while we're dismantling, so we don't leave vacancies in our communities. And people need to really understand that is so centered. It's a centripetal force of our organizing, is building and dismantling. Because we know that when we offer a critique, the real way to get that critique met is to also try to offer solutions. And we can't speak. I'm one person. I can't speak for all of Black Seattle. And to keep it 100, the Black community in Seattle and the Northwest generally has been systematically separated, divided, attacked, both in public, institutionally, and in other ways. And so when we can't, one person can't speak for the whole. And I think that we are doing intentional work to wrap in and bring in and call in as many people from our communities as we can. And so when it comes to building this alternative system, and I hate using the word alternative because it's not like we're trying to replace policing with another system that's going to also do harm. That's what reform is. And people need to understand when they're talking about their descriptions or whatever they're talking about. Reform means you change how it looks and it has the same outcome. We're not trying to have the same outcome. We're trying to change the goddamn outcomes. We're tired of pregnant women getting shot on their doorstep. We're tired of young Black men getting shot with their babies in their hands. And so we're saying police need to be defunded. $410 million a year, every year. Ooh. And what, 15 into arts and culture, less into housing, equitable development. The Equitable Development Initiative had $5 million in it. So what? It's really telling these people they got to put their money where their mouth is. And that's one step, because we still got the ideological elements. We need to educate people. We need to educate ourselves and understand that we're fighting against a lot. And our unity is where our power is. And so and we can't be fighting over crumbs with each other. Absolutely, we gotta link up, and that's where our power is. That's where the unity is. Who wants to go?
Fuck yes, Rel.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, Rel! Papa!
Damn, y'all, like for real. Like, I think that's so much of it is like with this transformation, it's next level shit. It's like, it's not about pushing incrementally. And I think we've been so trained to think about politics that way. How can we elect the one person that could potentially put the one policy in, and then we're going to backbone? We're just so used to crumbs. We're so used to small change. And I think like, as Decriminalize Seattle, as y'all have demonstrated, it's like you put forth the vision, like 50% of SPD gone, and it's happening. You know, if you had listened to the voices that were like, that's too soon, that's too much, like over 10 years, maybe you can like bring it down by 5%. Everybody has their cute little like solutions as to how to make it less radical, when really it's like,
in our lifetime.
It's happening, you know, and
in our
like,
lifetime.
look, it's going down. So I'm really thankful for y'all. Yeah, I mean, we're technically like supposed to wrap at 1, but what is supposed to when we're living in our own reality? And I do also really want to shout out people who have been tuning in today. We are at a little bit over $1,800 raised.
Yay!
I'm really, really hoping that we can get to 2K. So if you haven't given yet, please consider it. Thank you so much to the people who have been giving $5, $10. We really appreciate you. Yes, that's huge. We've had a gift all the way up to $500. Thank you so much for giving.
Damn.
You know, we're out here raising funds. I can't be in the streets with y'all in Seattle, so I got to do my little part and do what I can.
Go make it rain in Seattle.
Sugar daddy, show up, please.
And if anybody has any questions, please drop them in the chat. I know that really quickly, like we don't have the collective expertise right now to be talking about next steps with the Durkin recall and the payroll tax with Amazon. And so that's stuff that y'all can tap in with other organizers for. But if you have questions for Decrim Seattle, the SPD defunding, and the investment in community alternatives, you know, I think I love, Aretha, what you were talking about in terms of the 911 calls. Like, and that's the type of call, that wellness check that killed Charlena Lyles, that killed a pregnant woman and a mother in front of her children. Like, that's the kind of shit that we can avoid if community is calling into community and not calling into a weaponized, militarized face. Anyway, let's see. We did have one question that I was curious about. This was actually specifically for you, Day. It was about, let me see, where we at? This is what it is. So can Day speak a little bit about trying to build a platform for more leftist media content? And I'm curious, actually, I would love, because Speck, you've been the good white cis man over here, not taking up space, not talking. We see you, you know, but you,
we see you, Speck.
But your voice, you know, you are a really important window into what's been going on the ground. And so I'm curious, maybe Day and Speck, if you can take this question in terms of, I know that this is like specific, but in terms of just like, what does community reporting look like that takes away from the corporate media?
Does this look like I'm popping over the comment? Oh,
hell yeah. Do you know this
Hello,
guy?
let me read this.
You gotta snake up, bro.
Spec, do you want? I mean, I'll talk a little bit and I'll hand it off to Spec, but it's an interesting time. I think Spec more than me, not to throw your shit on the internet, Spec, but we have been critics of traditional media, especially local media, for a long time. I mean, this expands beyond just St. Clair media. I think everybody has a universal belief that anyone associated with St. Clair and corporate media like that is evil. But there's a reason why organizers on the ground here have called Cairo King and Como the KKK of media here in local Seattle, and that's a very maybe extreme thing to say for some people, but they have not served community. They're not lifting up the voices that need to share their stories in an authentic way. And you know, I think it takes a on the ground kind of digging in, like what is determined an actual real story or not, who's who's actually passing the mic to who. I mean, that kind of stuff is not happening. And I think that's been a real passion of mine, to build a legitimate, validated type of media entity that is going to push the narrative that we know we need to push, and that's not being received by the average Seattleite. And Spec's been doing a great job doing that, and a lot of like police kind of not tracking, but kind of like following what they've been doing throughout the protests. If you want to know what's going on, I think Spec has been laying that out on his Twitter from the beginning of the protests.
Word. Thanks, Day. Yeah, I mean, I just think the way everybody's talking about building alternatives to public safety and building systems that are accountable to community, we just need to start thinking that way about media as well. And I think in the way that like Jarrell talked about how we're not trying to reform and get the same outcomes, we're really just trying to change the outcome. And so I think we need to acknowledge that like the system that we build isn't necessarily going to look like television. It isn't going to have the same editorial structure that traditional media has. It isn't going to speak to the same people. It isn't going to speak from the same definition of unbiased. And so I just think that like, I also think it's important at this point in history and technology that we don't underestimate our ability to create media that can be received as just as credible and professional as so-called mainstream media. Certainly like those media outlets, when they go to create content, they turn to people from our community, from the arts community. And so it's just important to like understand the value that we have within our own community and ability to create this alternative system. But really just like be willing to reimagine it at all levels, and have the faith that like, if we're building a competent alternative, it's going to be able to counter and compete with the narrative we've been dealing with.
Thank you so much, Beck. And I think, we lost. Oh, there's Chrissy. Sorry, Chrissy. There you are. I think what you're saying is so spot on, and it absolutely is parallel to and in synchronicity with the idea of dismantling the systems that we've been taught are infallible, and understanding that we are the solution that we need. It's like we've been told like the news comes from these specific places, but really the news comes from us all. It's sourced from within us, and we have all the information that we need. It's about just opening up those channels. And I mean, talking about the way to do that off of big tech is a whole other thing in general. I think it kills me sometimes that we're directing our audiences and gathering on platforms like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, which themselves are deeply problematic and not there for our collective liberation by any means. So if there's any coders in the audience that want to create an alternative platform that isn't Signal that we can gather on, please holler. But yeah, so we're gonna wrap up really quickly. Thanks again so much. And I am extremely elated to report, actually I'm gonna add this one last Venmo, that we are at $2,180.
Hey, that's fucking wild.
Thank you so much to everybody.
It rain.
And thank you to all y'all, the activist class, Decrim Seattle, for all of your work, and the fact that, you know, together we can. I think you guys inspire me so much to think about like, oh no, we do have what we need, right? Like we are what we need. And it's just about organizing this in a better way and really just undoing the narratives that have told us that things have to happen in a certain way, because they absolutely don't have to happen that way. So I'm wondering if anybody has any last comments before we get to the main finale event, which is a acapella performance by Rel Be Free.
Damn!
Yeah!
Can I clarify something real quick?
What's that?
Can I clarify something real quick?
Please do.
I see a lot of people asking, and I want to make sure that we have not yet made the final vote to defund SPD by 50%. That vote is happening sometime in the first week of August. I've been hearing from people like Aretha that it might happen like August 3rd, which is my birthday, by the way. Would be a great birthday present.
Birthday!
It's Leo season coming up. Leo seasons. Leos have to let everybody know when their birthday is. So it's August 3rd. But that also might be the day that city council votes. We have seen council members change their minds in the past. So we have to keep up the pressure. We have to keep pushing them. The more public we make it, that like, hey, this is what they said they're going to do. Here are the screenshots. Oh my God, we're so thankful. Thank you, Councilmember Strauss. Thank you, Councilmember Herbold, for committing this. Like you said in this tweet or in this press conference, we have to continue to pressure. We have to make sure that happens no matter what. So it has not been finalized, but it will happen first week of August.
Amazing. And that's so true. Just be like, oh, you committed to this thing. Thank you so much for committing to this. And don't you dare uncommit. That's hella important. Do you feel like there's a best way for folks that are tuning in that are like, I really want to tap in and make sure that we push this over the finish line? Like, is it just making noise on social media, or is there a specific action that folks can take to bolster the work? Aretha?
So this coming week is when council members are going to be able to put in amendments or like issue ID on the Seattle Police Department budget. I cannot say the words. And so if people can keep calling and keep emailing their council members, like that does make a difference, because we have to keep the pressure on, and like they need to know that their constituents are listening to them and will call them out if needed. SPD is going to ramp up their PR campaign, and we can't let council members get backed into a corner and act out of fear. We need people to be bold. We need people to be brave. And so, yeah, call your council members. This week is really pivotal. We're going to see, the actual papers that put in the request to defund SPD. So let's get it, y'all.
Can I also say that, like, we're in the middle of an active uprising, so stay in the streets, because the streets is where the change happens, and call your council members, but keep marching, keep being out there, keep doing whatever you do to protest.
Wear your mask, get your hand sanitizer.
Yeah. Also, if you can't be in the streets, you're still hella valuable. And, folks that got different immune systems or different abilities, like there are so many ways for folks to get involved. So just adding to what Christy just said. Also, free all the protesters.
Yes.
And all the charges, because people should not be arrested and prosecuted for saying that this shit's fucked up when it's obviously fucked up. Shout out to Sheree LaSalle, who is running for the 43rd legislative out here. There was one more other thing I was going to shout out, and I forgot. But
well, I'm about to shout you out right now, because you're about to take us home with a performance. Because revolution and liberation cannot happen without art and creativity. That is the source. And I think, Rel, you really show that in action as a working artist and activist. And so we would love if you would bless us. With
Hey, shout out to King County Equity Now and Africa Town, Big Bro Y King. I've known him actually all of my life. But he has a little message that he be throwing out that he says pay the fee. So he says pay the fee. And what pay the fee is really about is all these businesses, institutions, politicians that have been sucking life out of our community, and we not reaping the benefits. In Seattle, we live in a city that they do a lot of memorabilia. So you'll go through a neighborhood and be like, oh, Black people used to live here, or oh wow, like the Asian community had some space here, and like Seattle thinks that that's cool, like to basically memorialize former communities. And so that shit's whack. They gotta pay the motherfucking fee. Uncle Ike's Ian Eisenberg got to pay the fee. PCC got to pay the fee. Durkin got to pay the fee. And so I'm finna drop a project on my birthday, which is July 21st. And it's called PTFD. And it means pay the fee, damn it. And so I'm finna spit this verse from a song that's called Pay the Fee. That's going to be on that project. Shout out to the indigenous people of the Northwest, the Coastal Salish, and Duwamish folks who are still not federally recognized. Peace to them, because it's the land that we stand on. Word. So I say, homage to Duwamish, how much do we have in common? Do say to D-Dub, if we linking up, it's an army. 5 Station 6, give me that. Moratorium on rent, yeah, give me that. I need that South End property properly. Probably Sound Transit holding it for profit. See a lot of poverty, contrast with the wealth. And they do hate you. They just do it with some stealth. Word to them little looters and young shooters holding Rugers from Yesler to Martin Luther. They said pay the fee. And this ain't paying me, it's paying we. And that's the only way to be, A to Z. And if you ain't make me, then you can't hate me. So all you opportunists, sus and sidekicks, one side stupid and the other side rich, peep the climate. And when the rain fall, don't be crying. We on the high road to Zion, flying. I'm a Cancer, still a lion. I ain't lying. Pay the fee. Pay up. Shout out to Hollis. We having brunch.
Shout out to Robbie Free. Blah, blah, blah.
Pay the fee.
Ral's
Did you hear my
so good, Ralph.
Pay the fee.
I just saw a cloud of smoke coming from Spec afterwards.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful
Yeah.
thing, man. That was a beautiful thing.
We should have queued that up.
Oh, man.
Thank you, Rel, so much for blessing us. Sorry, one more time, the date that project's about to drop.
7/21,
7/21.
July 21st.
Amazing. So everybody be on the lookout for that.
Happy birthday, Val.
Yeah.
Answer, baby.
So thankful to everybody that tuned in. I'm really happy to report that the latest count that we have is 2340.
Oh yeah.
$340.
Where's you been one from?
Y'all made
Listen,
it.
don't worry about it. Val,
Hey, pay the fee.
I'm trying to be okay.
Oh look, $100 came in, so we're making it three. Oh,
See?
okay,
I got 5 on it right now.
Yo, we're at 2455. So if somebody wants to make it a clean 2,500 and send 1,000. Oh, look at that. If anybody wants to send $1,125
Look at this man,
blog and creative justice, that would be incredible. Thank you so much for tuning in. Can we just give it up for some snappage again one more time for y'all for
Snap.
Snappage.
So thankful for y'all. Y'all are welcome on to Hollis Does Brunch at any time. I'm here to support the movement. I know that we've had 125 people tune in today and probably more. So thankful for the work that you do in community. So thankful for your searing vision, your uncompromised vision, your unapologetic vision that has gotten us to this place. And that's the only way that we're going to push it forward. And that's y'all. So much gratitude to you. So much gratitude to everybody who tuned in that got us to invest in the next generation of activist leaders and creators. It's incredible to see, and we're so thankful for everybody. We got some fun, just comments in the chat. Just to
Shout out to friendship.
yeah,
Hey, shout out to the elders. Shout out to the youth.
yeah.
Seriously.
Shout out to my sisters.
Zoomers.
Hootie hootie hee.
MVP.
Hootie hootie, huh?
Dave, if you keep messing my song up, I'm gonna come find you.
Sorry.
I just want to be the hype man.
Dang it.
15.
No, I wake up with that in my head.
Guys, we just got to 2570. Thank you.
Hell yeah.
So grateful for everybody who tuned in. Thank you, Activist Class. Thank you, Decrim Seattle.
Thanks,
We'll be
Hollis.
back at too soon, but sending a lot of love. Thank you so much for tuning in. Peace.
We love y'all.
Bye. Thanks for
Bye,
tuning
dear.
in.